In the next few videos, we'll explain the maintenance, settings, adjustments that we can make on the CONVIO and CONVIO FLEX draper head that we offer here in North America. The difference between a CONVIO and a CONVIO FLEX: the CONVIO is a rigid cutter bar offered in a 25 all the way up to a 35 working width, where the CONVIO FLEX is up to a 45-foot working width. The difference between the two: the CONVIO is a rigid cutter bar, where the CONVIO FLEX has a flexible cutter bar up to 9 inches. The CONVIO offers simplicity, efficiency, as well as maximizing the LEXION throughput. It has 3 really neat features we'll continue to talk further on. The first being auto float. That is offered on the CONVIO FLEX. It's offered, as we can see in the cutter bar behind me, that it contours perfectly to the ground, maximizing the crop going into the machine. The next feature I want to talk about is our auto belt speed. Auto belt speed is a feature that, based on our ground speed and crop throughput, can adjust our side drapers as well as our center draper feeding into the feeder house, getting the most consistent, uniform profile into the machine to harvest the crop efficiently. The next feature I want to talk about is an operation mode: Auto Flex. Auto Flex is a self-learning mode that the combine uses to control the ground pressure on the cutter bar. This operation mode allows the cutter bar to fit really well with contouring to the ground, especially in hilly conditions. The next feature I want to talk about is our reel. The reel is a rollover reel, which is a self-cleaning reel. When it gets to the draper belt, it aligns vertically straight up, dropping the crop. This is all thanks to our reel arms that are attached to a cam. This cam is adjustable so we can get more aggressive or less aggressive throw, so we can position the crop perfectly in the center of the draper belt. In future videos, we're going to talk about the adjustments, maintenance, and settings for the CONVIO. In this video, we're going to talk about the adjustments we can make to the CONVIO to best fit different conditions. We'll first start by connecting the head. First, we'll start off with our locking mechanism. There is one locking mechanism for both sides. As we can see here, when we do lock, our bottom pin will be engaged, as well as we lock the top on the feeder house. Next, what we'll focus on would be our PTO shaft. We'll get this shield out of the way, remove our PTO shaft, and engage it on our pulley. We'll make sure our PTO shaft goes until we hear it click. It is important to keep this PTO shaft well lubricated so it's an easy install for the operator. Next, we'll look at the multi-coupler handle. We'll first remove this plug, and this plug just keeps our all of our electrical components and our hydraulic components clean. We'll put this out of the way for now. We'll grab our multi-coupler, unscrew it from the handle, and install it on the head. There is guide pins on this multi-coupler handle to make sure the connectors and the hydraulic plugs are securely fastened. And then we use our screw-in handle to do the rest of the work for us. And while putting the multi-coupler and the PTO shaft, we want to make sure the machine is turned off. That ensures that we're not going to have any problems with installing the PTO shaft, as well as when we do install the multi-coupler, the CBIS will load with the proper information when the key is off during the next key cycle. After we've installed the multi-coupler, we'll put the plug back on the feeder house, and then we'll go look at the left end divider to see all the adjustments we can make from there. Once we're on the left-hand side, the first adjustment we can make would be the end divider suspension. In the middle position is the average coming from CLAAS. The upper position is the most suspension for our end divider, allowing the most amount of flex. The bottom position here, what I'm pointing to, is the least amount of suspension from the end divider. We can make this adjustment based off several adverse and field conditions. Next, we'll look at our end divider right over here. We do have 2 positions for end divider for tall and small crops, and we can adjust our spring length to make sure that it is tensioned properly. We want it in the bottom position with that spring assisting the end divider go up as it goes across the field. We did touch on the tensioning in our maintenance video. We do want to make sure the indicator is matching up with our sticker in the green line. Next, we'll take a look at our reel fore-aft adjustment just above. Now we'll talk about our reel and all the adjustments we can make on it from this side. What we do on this side, we do have to make to the other cylinder in the center and then the far right-hand side. But for our fore-aft position, we can have different settings based off this pin location here. If we do change this pin location, we're going to have to change our sensor position as well to match the same hole that we put it in. For our reel bottom end stop, we'll have to loosen this jam nut, and then we can turn the cylinder rod to the right height. Please refer to the service manual based on how far the reel tines should be above our cutter bar. Next, we're going to go talk about our reel pitch position that we can make on the right-hand side of the head. Now we'll take a look at our cam adjustment for the reel. What this adjustment will do, will change where the crop is thrown on our draper belt. Ideally, we want the crop laying in the center, and this adjustment can help, based off our crop conditions, accomplish that. For this adjustment, we have to adjust the one on the right-hand side as well as the adjustment for the left-hand reel in the center of the head. First, we'll have to loosen up this lock nut, just enough that we can feel all the tension is off. And then we'll put our 18mm wrench in this position. We'll unlock our locking lever, and then we'll see we can adjust our reel to a different position. After that, we'll want to make sure to lock this into position with this lock nut. We'll tighten it up, and then we'll go to the other adjustment on the left-hand side, which is in between the reels. Next, we're going to focus on our synchronization of our dual knife drive to make sure they're cutting properly. To check our knife overlap for our dual header drive convios, we do have marks that we have to check on the right and left-hand side. This will ensure proper cut of the crop and most efficient. So we'll rotate with any bar that you have until we get these two lines to add up. If they do match, we know this side is adjusted properly, and we can check it on the other side. Next, we'll take a look right here at these hydraulic couplings. These would be if the machine had the canola side knives installed, and they'd be replacing our end dividers. We'll take a look at our stabilization wheels at this back side next. Here we have the stabilization wheel on the right-hand side. The adjustments can be made the same on the left hand, and what the purpose of the stabilization wheels are for are to offer support to the end of the CONVIO head. There's several adjustments. The recommended setting for these while going is to set your head into working height and then lower the head or lower the wheel into the correct position. When we load the head onto a trailer, we have to make sure that the wheels are all the way in the up position. Next, we're going to talk about our cross augers for the right and left hand side and how we can adjust those. Looking for adjusting the pitch of the cross augers, this has to be done on the outside and inside of each right and left cross auger. We want to position the cross auger so it is help assisting the feeding of the crop into the feeder house, as well as it's not too low, disrupting the crop flow, or too high, not doing anything with assisting of the crop flow. These cross augers are primarily seen in the large bushy crops, and to adjust it, we'll have to loosen up this lock nut. Once it's loose, we'll get a 16mm and then focus on this back bolt right here. We can see with adjusting counterclockwise, we're raising this side of the cross auger. Once we find the right position to meet the crop conditions, we will go back and snug up this locking nut. And this will have to be done again for the outside and the center for the right and left cross auger. Next, we're going to go look at the finger adjustments on the main drum. On the main auger for the CONVIO, we have adjustments for the fingers, and that adjustment for the fingers is on a cam located right behind this pillar. There is 4 positions based on how tall the crop is. The taller the crop, the less time we want at the bottom of the drum. Vice versa, for the shorter crop, we want the tines near the bottom. A note for this is we want to make sure there is no tine contact with the trough floor. In this video, we're going to talk about all the adjustments we can make on the CONVIO using our CBIS Touch. First, we'll look at our header main menu tab. We'll start in the parameters. After we connect the multi-coupler, our CONVIO should be auto-selected in the header type. Right after we select our head, we'll make sure to adjust our working width, and then we can go down and further look at some other settings. Our auto contour setting is right underneath, and we can adjust the sensitivity for it raising and lowering, as well as our side-to-side lateral tilt. The next icon below is our header manual raise and lowering speed. The left icon shows the header percentage that we can raise it at. The icon to the right will be the lowering percentage that we can lower the head faster or slower based on that percentage. The icon below, we have lowering speed for auto contour, and we can adjust that percentage. The higher percentage, the faster it'll drop. The icon below here, the maximum auto contour for ground pressure, that'll be the max ground pressure the cutter bar will force on the ground. Below there, we have the auto contour operation mode. This is a really big adjustment for our CONVIO FLEX, that we have 4 different modes that we can use. Shown up here, grain, we do have 2 options for working height, and both are going to be in the rigid position for the cutter bar. The next icon, Flex Manual, that operating mode will have 2 working heights that we can select with our C-motion handle, and the cutter bar will be flexible for both. Lodge Grain Flex mode, that mode will have a rigid position in the upper position and then a flex position in the lower. Our next menu, Auto Flex, will be using the feeder house and the cutter bar working together to cut the crop at the optimum level really close to the ground. We'll select grain to start with. And we can see our auto contour mode did change to grain. Going further down in our parameters menu, we see the draper belt slip limits for our side draper belts as well as our center draper belts. This head does have the cross augers installed, and we can turn it on with green and off will be gray. And we can also monitor the belt slip of the conveyors with this icon here. If we have it deactivated, we will not detect any slip on the side drapers or the center draper. We'll leave that on. The icon below here is the standstill monitoring of the belts. If it sees 0 speed, it will give us an alarm in the CBIS. Next, we'll talk about the automatic reel control for torque control. The left icon shows the header position. When the header sees extra force in that hydraulic circuit, it'll raise the reel out of the way. And their sensitivity is the icon to the right of it. We can make it more sensitive with a higher percentage and less sensitive with the lower percentage. Next, we'll look at our settings to make sure everything is correct before we start the head and go through this menu. We can see our header position icon at the top of that setting. Below that, we have our reel settings for how high our reel is, our fore and aft, and the speed of our reel. Below that, we get to our CONVIO settings. This is an important note to make here that makes our CONVIO FLEX really special. For active float, we can change the amount of ground pressure the cutter bar is applying to the ground. Below, we have our manual speeds for our side draper and center draper belt. Currently selected, we have our auto belt speeds enabled, which allow it to change the belt speed based on the ground drive speed. We can also change our header pitch setting, usually recommended for -1 in most applications. Next, we'll get to our header speed. We can see it's grayed out because our front attachment drive is currently off. Our header speed will control the output speed from our shaft from the feeder house to the head, and this will control the RPM getting sent from the combine to the head. Next, we'll go into our functions page before we start the head. We can see in our functions we have options to adjust our reel on and off, our reel forward, reel up and down, fore and aft, as well as our auto torque control for the reel. Below there we have our lateral leveling with pre-selected height control. With this on, we're able to adjust the faceplate of the feeder house to help the head have optimum level of cut with the crop in the field. Below this icon is the cutting angle control on and off. That controls the faceplate of the feeder house on the head. The next icon below is our auto belt speed, located here. Our auto belt speed will keep the belts in a ratio with the ground speed, so we're constantly having a good throughput of crop fed into the machine. With this icon off, we can go back to our settings and see our CONVIO settings. We have a percentage for our side drapers and center draper belt. In this icon, we can see that our ground drive speed does not have a relation with our center and side draper belts. We will now turn on our threshing and then look at our settings for the head. We engage our threshing, and we can also engage our front attachment drive. Once we engage our front attachment, we can see where the current position of our feeder house is. We can go to our different positions by using our C-motion handle, and we can set new ones just by manually lowering the head and how to save a position. We can hold the bottom A for 3 seconds. What icon this will change will be the icon in the white. We're holding the bottom button. After 3 seconds, we'll hear an audible tone by CBUS, and we'll be able to set a new working height. Hitting the bottom button again will change to the upper icon located there. And finally, getting into the headland position when we're at the end of the field, we can hit the upper arrow on our C-motion handle. Hitting that button again will cycle the head to the other headland position. And it can be adjusted the same way. We can lower the position, and we can save the new position by holding the top icon for 3 seconds. This was in our grain operating mode. So both of these positions on the left, the cutter bar is rigid. Next, we'll go look at our flex manual operating mode. The operating modes again are located in the parameters section. Before we can adjust it, we have to make sure to shut the head off. We'll see 0 RPM. Once we do see that, we are able to change our auto contour operating mode. For flex manual mode, we do have 2 pre-select positions, the same as our grain operating mode. We're currently in our flex position on the cutter bar shown by this image here. Same way to cycle through our different operating modes by hitting the bottom button. We'll go to bring the cutter bar to the upper height. And we can also go to our headland height. It'll go to this white icon on the right side by hitting the top button. For our next operating mode, we'll go into lodge grain. To get in there, we'll turn off our front attachment, go into our parameters, and then scroll down to our auto contour operating mode. We see that it is already pre-selected and saved in here. From here, we can start our front attachment, and we still have our 2 working height positions located here. The first pre-selected saved position, when we get to that position, will be a rigid cutter bar. When the pre-selected height is saved below that black arrow, we can see the cutter bar will be in flexible mode. And now the cutter bar is in flexible mode. And we can go to the headland height the same way by hitting the upper arrow. Our last operating mode is Auto Flex. Before we change it, we'll shut off our front attachment drive, go into our header main menu, and select Auto Flex. The nice thing about Auto Flex is that it controls the feeder house as well as the cutter bar to help the cutter bar cut as low as it can to the ground. Getting into the settings for the Auto Flex, we can engage our front attachment drive, and we'll see we have one current setting saved. We can add another by going to the pre-selected auto contour. We can add another height by manually adjusting the feeder house position and then holding and saving a new working position. And we can cycle through them just like the other operating modes. One thing I want to bring up is our active float pressure. For this, we'll turn off our front attachment and go into Flex Manual. Once we get into Flex Manual, we can minimize our parameters page and go into our settings. And here we can see our cutter bar pressure. It's currently set at 69 bar, and we can change this with the front attachment engaged. Going to our working position, adjusting our pressure. If we want our cutter bar to be more rigid, we can go a higher pressure. Save it, and we can see the blue icon going to that screen. But before we can cycle through our pre-selected, we do have to save that working height position with all of those settings. And by doing that, we just hold the bottom A position again. Hearing those three beeps, our settings did save with this pre-selected arrow. Next, we'll talk about reversing of the front attachment and the header. We can reverse the header by disengaging our front attachment and then pushing a button on the armrest and then pushing on our header drive. This will retract our center draper belt as well as retract the reel in case there's any clumps on the draper belts. Next, we'll talk about the reel adjustments. We can adjust the reel by using this button here on our C-motion handle. Forward and back, up and down. Our reel is supposed to aid the crop onto the draper belt, putting it in the center position. We can save our reel settings with each front attachment by doing the same by holding our upper and lower save position buttons on the C-motion handle. Another feature I do want to bring up is our auto park position. What this will do will bring the reel all the way back and all the way down, as well as put the cutter bar into rigid position. This would be used for putting the header on a trailer. To get it into this position, we will deactivate our main drive and our front attachment drive, raise the head up off the ground, and hold our bottom working position button. Holding this button, we can see the reel drop as well as go back, and the cutter bar is in rigid position. Those three tones let us know the header is ready to be trailered. In this video, we're going to take a look at the maintenance of the CONVIO header. First, we'll start with this main transfer gearbox. We can see there is sight glass when we make sure oil is visible in that sight glass. And we can fill it through this breather here. Next, we'll talk about our hydraulic reservoir. It is a 15-gallon capacity, and we do have coolers underneath both sides of the header for cooling capacity, and then we have the reservoir as well. Checking the oil level in the reservoir, we want to make sure to utilize this sight glass. As we can see, the oil is in the middle level, which is the optimum range for the CONVIO. For the returns filter, please reference the operator's manual for service interval. Next, we'll get into our stabilization wheel. This stabilization wheel is a closed system, and it's not a part of the hydraulics on the head. That being said, there's an adjustment port that we can monitor our pressure for this. The pressure spec is 20 plus or minus 2 bar. and it's filled the same way that we tension our tear tracks on the LEXION. Coming back over here to our main transfer gearbox, we do see plenty of PTO shafts, 3 to be exact. We want to make sure we grease these grease zerks based on the operator's manual, as well as there's stickers indicating the grease interval as well on the PTO shaft. Below this PTO shaft, we see this black container containing our service manual. Make sure to fill this out with every service interval for this CONVIO. Next, we'll take a look at our end divider and other maintenance on there. We're on the left-hand side by this crop divider, and we want to make sure when we're ever doing maintenance or any safety things on the head, we want to make sure to lock in that cylinder stop. And then when we do raise the head, we'll have to lower the feeder house safety locks as well. Here on the left-hand side, we're going to open up our safety panel, as well as open up this back one. Once we get this back panel off, we'll be able to look at our angle gearbox. And there is a sight glass visible here to make sure it is full of fluid. Next, we'll move into our PTO shaft, making sure to grease this at the 250-hour interval stated by the sticker or referencing our operator's manual. For tensioning and detensioning the left and right-hand side draper belt, we'll first have to deactivate the lock mechanism for our linkage. We'll get some room, and then we're able to adjust this linkage, turning it clockwise to tension the belt and counterclockwise to detension it. We want to make sure that this indicator on our linkage lines up with our tensioning sticker on our outer linkage. After we make the proper adjustment, we'll close the linkage and then verify that we are tensioned properly. Make sure that that arrow is pointing in the green and not the red. Next, we'll go look underneath the center draper belt and check that tension. After we adjust the side draper belts on the left and right hand side, we can tension the center draper belt. Both sides do have the similar linkage here, where we have a washer and another sticker indicating the proper tension. For adjusting the center draper belt, we'll make sure to unlock the locking lever and then detension the center draper belt. We can adjust it by spinning this adjustment here clockwise to tighten, counterclockwise to loosen. Once we do make our adjustment, we're able to relock the center draper belt and then check the indicator with that washer to make sure it's still in the green, it's properly tensioned. Next, we'll look at this front roller on our center draper belt. There is a grease zerk. Every 100 hours, we want to make sure it's lubricated and we're not having any excessive wear or heat on that bearing. Next, we'll open up this service door underneath our center draper belt in case of adverse conditions and mud and material build up there. We can do that by these levers here. Opening up this service door will give us access to the underside of the center draper belt. We can clean debris and material to keep the center draper belt spinning freely. Now we're going to check the maintenance on our CAC bands. Our CAC bands can change depending on the configuration and how wide the working width of the head is, but standard on all of them, we want to make sure the chain is properly connected, as well as our plastic wand, there's no cracks and it's still there. Having a cracked sensing band will affect the performance out in the field. For the CONVIO FLEX specifically, we do have this flexible support bar going to our cutter bar. There is a hydraulic cylinder that we want to make sure to check for leaks so the system will work properly. Next, we'll look at the maintenance of our wear shoe underneath our cutter bar. Depending on if it's a standard CONVIO or a CONVIO FLEX, the shoe size will be different. Here on the CONVIO FLEX, it is a smaller wear plate rather than the standard CONVIO. Next, we'll get into the cutter bar and our fingers. Our fingers are carriage bolts that can be loosened from the top to remove so we can have access to change out our knife teeth. Changing the knife teeth, there is bolts on the underside that we can replace the knives easily. We do have to be careful when we're looking at the overlap teeth. There is a different design where the bolt is recessed into the knife itself. Next, we'll take a look at our feed auger on the CONVIO. Before we talk about our main auger, we're going to jump back to our sickle section mentioned previously. We do have overlapping teeth, which are different from the rest of the cutter bar. We can see that here there's recessed bolts in there holding those. If we ever do damage a sickle section right or left, if it's a dual knife drive, in the upper frame there is spare segments for each in case of a failure. Now looking at our main auger, we can see our fingers in our main drum. If we get a 5mm Allen wrench, we can access these fingers in case they do break. We'll first open up one of several service windows into this drum. Once inside, we will have access to remove these fingers or replace them if one becomes damaged. Once we get that window off, we don't have a bolt-on way to attach these fingers. There is a clamp. So as seen here, our finger can come out, but due to the design, it will not come all the way out of the head. We can remove the finger, pulling it out of this service window, and we can see the finger is clamped in there. One thing to note on this finger, there is a fracture line in case it does come in contact with a rock or any other material coming into the feeder house. It will shear and keep this finger inside the drum, prevent it from damaging anybody or anything around the head. To reinstall, we'll put it back in the socket, seen here, and then we can clamp it, lock it back into place. That'll wrap up all of our adjustments for our CONVIO and CONVIO FLEX models. Please always use the operator's manual when making further adjustments.